I want to, talk briefly about the other side of the equation in terms of business to business sales.
Yep.
In terms of um, two things really. As black businesses, how do we support other black businesses? I mean, that probably won't be too different than the consumer piece, but I want to know your take on it.
Mhm.
But then, you have these really large multinational corporations, you have these supplier diversity programs, you have government agencies who have the same thing. um, do you view us taking advantage of those, supplier diversity and just bidding on those types of contract as some type of handout? That's the first piece of it. If so, or if not, I guess if not, how does, how do we get the demand up for the business side of things in terms of
Mhm.
like the corporations to invest in black businesses as well?
Right. So I do not believe it to be a handout in any way, shape, or form. So I just want to be 100% definitive on that. Right. The second thing is I start with the paradigm shift. At the end of the day, we want ourselves, we want our community, and we want the communities that interface with us to act in different ways, right? Ways that create jobs, create businesses, provide capital for those businesses, right, across our community. So for me, it's helping people to actually see the problem either anew or to see it to the scale and the scope. Sometimes they feel like, these companies are being kind of forced on them, right? Like they're fine with whoever they're working with and whatnot. You have this negative perception that the quality is lower and or they're only there for artificial reasons above and beyond their capabilities and skill set and the phenomenal things that they do. This is going back to the bias that's playing out, right? And then the cost is you don't get the contracts or you have to cross this really treacherous, very difficult playing field to be able to be engaged. So one of the things that I try to do is help people understand, like, how did we get here in the first place, right? And that's where I do a lot about talking of what I do in the second part of the book, where I talk about the historical narrative. What was the cost of slavery? What was the cost of Jim Crow? What was the cost of separation? And it's a very traumatic thing to actually, it's a traumatic thing, and it's also an enlightening thing to see the role that the environment played intentionally and longitudinally on helping to create the very situation that we're in. Typically, when people start to see that, they start to ask, how do I help, right? And what can we do? And that's where I introduce the PhD concept. If you're focused on creating jobs and businesses and expanding business in our community, the best way to do it is to use your supply chain. Like, yes, I want you to cut checks for the nonprofits. Please do that, double, triple down, and do all that stuff. But don't do just that when you control a $6 billion supply chain. You could do business with Black enterprise and create $50,000 through that. And you're affecting a family per job, right? And communities are based on families, and families are based on the ability to earn income to cover today and to have something left over for tomorrow. Right? So we can't have strength in communities unless we have the jobs and the businesses, right? And the capital to support it. So if you're an organization, if you're a government, if you're a business, one of the best things that you can do is to do more business, right? With Black enterprise. Now, I'm a for everybody, but not at the expense of us kind of person, right? So, and there's something that I like to talk about very specifically, which is help people understand that, when we say minority and diversity and inclusion, these are typically euphemisms for not white male, right? Not white male. And then I said, listen, here's what I want you to understand. Let's talk about who you are describing when you say that, because not white male is 90% of people on planet Earth, right? It's an incredibly non-specific, massively general approach to a very specific problem. And what happens is when you start looking at the revenue from businesses that have employees, if you put like, white female businesses, Latino business, Asian businesses, Black businesses, if you put them all together, Black business is about 4% of that whole pool. So when you start talking about this minority, diversity, inclusion spend, Black businesses are getting about 4% of that total spend. People think that Black businesses are getting the benefit from it. We absolutely aren't. Right? And it's very important that we are specific. And I'm not saying that people are trying to be nefarious. What I'm saying is, even though they're well-meaning, what they're doing isn't working. Let me give you a couple of specific examples, right? So if you say, listen, I think it's super critical that we do more business with like women businesses. I love it. I totally agree with it. double, triple down on that. If you look at like businesses that are driven by women that have employees, right, the largest ones, you're talking about 1.2 trillion in spend in aggregate, right? But if you say of that, how much of that is from Black women? I'm interested in that, right? Because those are pillars of families within our community. It's less than 2%. What that means is for every $100 you're investing in advancing women business, which you should do and keep doing, it's not until the $99 that a sister is seeing a benefit from it. And that's what we have to understand. You got to be specific if you want to impact Black enterprise, right? If you ask the same question, if you say, listen, I think it's super critical that we do more business with our, Latino brothers, right, and sisters. I think it's phenomenal, right? Double, triple down on it. We should absolutely do that. If you look at them as a group, kind of in total, for the companies that have employees, it's about roughly 380, 390 billion in total, right? But if you say, of those businesses, which are the ones that are Black Latino business? Again, it's less than 2%.
If that, right? Yeah,
right?
because, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. So we're back in terms of it's not until the $99, right, that a Black Latino business is going to see any benefit from that. So you're going to have to be specific, because what's actually happening is very little of those resources is actually ending up in the hands of Black enterprise. And we can't stimulate demand for employment, and we can't grow businesses, right, if we aren't providing them with the demand. And that's super critical that purchase policymakers and leaders understand that. You can have a tremendously powerful, positive impact, transformative impact in our community if you do more business with our businesses.
You know what? I definitely agree with that. And I love the examples that you've given. But will that be enough to change the behaviors of, these purchasing leaders in terms of, you can have a positive impact on the community that's not yours, right? So, ultimately it'll go back to the bottom line for them. Mm-hmm. Or am I going to be good? Is this company going to be good enough to do the work that I need them to do? And through psychological biases, that may or may not happen in terms of getting that contract, and especially getting that contract as a whole, instead of being pigeonholed to this minority supplier development, right, type of contract.